Hello friends, hope all of you are doing great. Today we shall be discussing about consciousness, brain and behavior. Our discussion will mainly be based on Vander's physiology but not only limited to that book. In our last class, we have learned some very basic concepts about nervous system. We also discussed that the main function of nervous system is perception of sensory information, processing of that information in CNS and control of motor response. If you have not seen the previous video in this series, I strongly recommend that you watch that video before you proceed any further. Our discussion will primarily be based upon section 8 of the current edition of Vander's physiology, but I will draw from many other standard sources. Let's begin with a story. This is Sir Roger Penrose, who is a famous British physicist and a mathematician. He made bona fide contributions in the field of quantum mechanics, human mind and consciousness. His famous book, The Emperor's New Mind, begins with an anecdote. A child confronts a computer. This supercomputer has far more artificial intelligence than the humans. The child asks a simple question: what is it like to be a computer? The computer falls silent, unable to even comprehend the question, let alone answer it. Yet, it is a question that any human, even a child, can understand easily. This story dramatically points to the nature of the hard problem of consciousness, which we shall discuss subsequently in this video. All around the globe, anesthetists, physiologists, neuroscientists, neuropsychiatrists, and other interdisciplinary specialists are working on the problem of consciousness. Among them is Professor V.S. Ramachandran, who is a well-known neuroscientist. In his book, Phantoms in the Brain, he opines that despite 200 years of research, the most basic questions about the human mind remain unanswered, as does the really big question, what is consciousness? Our discussion will be divided into the following three sections: states of consciousness, conscious experiences, and conscious activities and consciousness per se. We will start with the states of consciousness. Consciousness has been defined variously in scientific literature. In standard physiology books, it is defined as the level of alertness or perception of something. One way of classification can be according to the states of consciousness. It can be of the following types: normal state of consciousness, impaired state of consciousness, altered state of consciousness. Normal state of consciousness can be further divided into waking state, dream, and deep sleep. Impaired state of consciousness. Example can be anesthesia, locked-in syndrome, and coma. Locked-in syndrome is also known as pseudocoma. In this condition, although the patient is aware, he cannot move or communicate verbally due to total paralysis of nearly all the voluntary muscles of the body except for some partial eye movements and blinking. And finally, altered state of consciousness. It can be due to hallucinogens like LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, lucid dreams. Lucid dreams occur if you are aware that you are dreaming. And in hypnosis, hypnosis is a human condition with an increased capacity to respond to suggestions. States of consciousness can be investigated in the following two ways: by behavior, which can be subjective or objective, and by pattern of brain activities with electroencephalogram or functional MRI. We will briefly look at some examples. Glasgow Coma Scale. An example of objective neurological scale is Glasgow Coma Scale. Glasgow Coma Scale is a way to communicate about the level of consciousness of a patient. Three aspects of behavior are independently measured: eye opening, verbal performance, and motor responses. The score ranges from 3 to 15. Brain activity can also be measured by EEG or electroencephalogram. You can see the electrodes and the EEG recording. And EEG measures the electrical impulses in your brain with the help of several electrodes attached to your brain. The different waves of EEG are shown here. We will discuss EEG in a later class, but let's just look at the basics. In the awake alert state, we get the beta rhythm, which is represented by the first yellow strip here. We get alpha rhythm when you are lying down with your eyes closed but not sleeping. While sleeping, we get two patterns of ECG. The first pattern is called NREM sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep, and it is divided into several stages. The first blue strip represents the theta wave. This is the first stage of NREM sleep. Then we go to stage 2, which is characterized by sleep spindles and K complexes, as you can see in the second blue strip. Finally, in the NREM sleep, the third stage, we get the delta rhythm, and this occurs in very deep sleep. Next, we have rapid eye movement sleep, or it is also known as paradoxical sleep, because the EEG pattern we get is very similar to the beta rhythm. In this REM stage, we usually experience dreams. Moving on to the next section, that is conscious experiences. It refers to experiences that a person is aware of, the external objects and events, and the internal idea, emotions, feelings, etc. Before you proceed any further, please pause to do the exercise in the other video, for which I have given the link in the description below. It's a short video of less than 2 minutes. While watching, you must silently count the passes made by the people in the white shirt. After you see the video, come right back. Again, I will repeat. The discussion will be far more meaningful and interesting only if you watch that video right now. Okay, so we will start again. Hope all of you have watched that previous video, which I have linked in the description. In 1999, Simon and Chabris demonstrated this phenomenon of inattentional blindness through the invisible gorilla experiment which you just saw. Basic to the concept of the conscious experience is the question of selective attention or inattentional blindness. While attending an event, we frequently fail to notice an additional, unexpected but fully visible object in the same settings. In our case, it was the gorilla. Selective attention means avoiding the distraction of irrelevant stimuli while seeking out and focusing on stimuli that are momentarily important. In many cases, it can be useful for us. For example, students ignoring distractions in a library. For selective attention to function, a process called pre-attentive processing comes into play. If attention is to be directed only towards stimuli that are meaningful, the nervous system must have the means to evaluate the importance of incoming sensory information. Pre-attentive processing directs our attention towards the part of the sensory world that is of particular importance. It prepares the brain's perceptual processes for it. Neural mechanism for selective attention. Directing our attention to an object involves several distinct neurological mechanisms. First, our attention must be disengaged from its present focus. Attention must be moved and engaged in a new focus, and finally, there must be an increased level of arousal that produces prolonged attention to the new focus. One of the areas responsible for selective attention is the brain stem. It plays an important role in orienting and selective attention. The interaction of various sensory modalities in single cell can be detected experimentally. For example, visual and auditory input from the same location in space will enhance the firing rates of the so-called multisensory cells. In contrast, the same type of stimuli originating at different places will have little effect or may even inhibit their response. Thus, weak clues can add together to enhance each other's significance. So we pay attention to the event, whereas we may ignore an isolated small clue. Thalamus is also involved in selective attention. Inputs from regions of cerebral cortex and brainstem modulates synaptic activity from thalamus, making it a filter that can selectively influence the transmission of sensory information. Researchers are just beginning to understand how the various areas of the attentional system interact. The final section will be studied under three subsections, that is conscious activities, easy problem of consciousness and hard problem of consciousness. Professor David Chalmers coined the terms hard and easy problem of consciousness. He is the head of Mind, Brain and Consciousness Unit of New York University. Let's begin with conscious activities. This is an example of a driverless car, or it is also known as a Google car. This car can drive just like or even better than any humans. But when you drive a car, you have the first person subjective experience like fear, anxiety, which the Google car or the driverless car fails to appreciate. The Google cars are totally unable to comprehend the first person subjective feeling of the person involved, that is you. This first person subjective feeling is known as the conscious experiences. Here we investigate how the brain causes the wide variety of our cognitive, affective and conative activities. Cognition means thought, affect means feeling and conation means action. Easy problem of consciousness is the objective study of the brain. Objective studies like fMRI can show the areas of, say, occipital lobe responsible for interpreting incoming visual information. Similarly, objective studies are done for other areas to correlate our conscious and subconscious activities. These investigations and studies are not at all easy. Please note this important point. Then why they are called easy problems of consciousness? Because they are easy compared to the hard problem of consciousness, which we shall discuss in a moment. Another very important point to remember, none of these studies, objective studies, that is, for example, fMRI, are able to comprehend the first person subjective feeling of the person involved. Remember the driving example we discussed earlier? So this brings us to the hard problem of consciousness. It is the problem of explaining the relationship between the objective physical world and our subjective conscious experience. It seems difficult to satisfactorily explain conscious subjective experience in purely objective physical terms, like in terms of brain activities. Let us understand the hard problem of consciousness with an example. Let's suppose you see this beautiful rose. Light rays from this rose falls into your eyes, goes to the retina and finally through optic nerves goes to the brain as electric signals in the form of action potential and chemical signals in the brain in the form of neurotransmitters, say for example acetylcholine, noradrenaline, etc. At this point, something magical happens. Suddenly, we experience the magnificent outside world. Remember, we do not experience the firing of neurons in our brain. Rather, we have the inner subjective experience and feeling of seeing this magnificent rose. This is the mysterious step. Nobody knows about it. Nobody has any idea about where to begin. Two mainstream scientific views are: the first is consciousness does not exist, only body exists, but there is no such thing as consciousness. This, in my opinion, is a ridiculous claim because consciousness is the first thing that all of us experiences. So this explanation of the materialistic scientists does not hold ground. The other group of materialistic scientists claim that brain somehow produces consciousness. It is called the epiphenomenon, that when brain reaches a certain level of complexity, it suddenly produces consciousness. But obviously, these people are unable to explain the mechanism by which consciousness arises. These materialistic reductionist views are being challenged by Professor David Chalmers, who is the head of Mind, Brain and Consciousness Unit of New York University. He coined the terms hard and easy problems of consciousness, which we have seen earlier. He asks, how can a physical brain generate the first person experiences like sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, feeling, desire, pleasure, pain, understanding or lack of it, memory, forgetting? All of these are directly experienced by us. It is impossible for a physical brain to generate such first person subjective personal experience. According to him, consciousness is the fundamental feature of the universe. There is no time or scope to go into the details now, but you can do self-investigation about this if you like. The nature of consciousness, as has been suggested by most of the ancient wisdom tradition, is necessarily universal and primary. Surprisingly, some of the leading modern researchers are coming to the same conclusions. From the spiritual traditions, I will just give one example, although many more examples could be cited. This is Swami Sarvapriyananda. Swami Sarvapriyananda is the Nagral Fellow at the Harvard University. He summarized precisely the whole problem of some, not all, some of the modern scientific approaches. I quote, "The problem of consciousness studies at the present juncture is that it does not seem to recognize the possibility of pure consciousness. It is interested in the consciousness manifestation in daily transactions, empirical consciousness. Since this empirical consciousness is a reflection of pure consciousness, we cannot formulate a satisfactory theory of consciousness if we limit ourselves to empirical consciousness and discount the very possibility of pure consciousness. By admitting pure consciousness, a powerful solution to the intractable hard problem of consciousness may perhaps be found. The Gordian knot could finally be untied." Unquote. Friends, he is making a very profound statement here. Pause the video if you like and listen to the quotation once again. Consciousness is a vast and rapidly developing area in the field of research. We have just scratched only the surface in this short video. If you are really interested, you can read more from the various source texts that are available. But before we end, we will look at some of the scientists and doctors who have contributed or are still working in the area of consciousness. This is Professor Francis Crick. He is a British molecular biologist and a neuroscientist. Along with James Watson, he discovered the double helix structure of DNA molecule. In 1962, together with Dr. Watson and Maurice Wilkins, he won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Professor Crick was profoundly interested in human consciousness and did extensive work in consciousness fields. According to Crick, human consciousness is central to human existence. Professor Gordon Gallup is well known for developing self-recognition test which gauges self-awareness in animals. Professor Henrik Arson is a neuroscientist at the Karolinska Institute of Sweden, which is one of the world's foremost medical universities. He is famous for inducing out-of-body experience in healthy subjects. The subjects also confirmed that they had experienced sitting behind their physical body and looking at it from a distance. Professor Christoph Koch is a well-known American neuroscientist famous for his work on the neural basis of consciousness. This is Professor Stuart Hameroff, an American anesthesiologist. He closely worked with Sir Roger Penrose, a famous mathematician and physicist. They developed the concept of proto-consciousness. Professor Hameroff contends that consciousness originates from quantum states in neural microtubules. Finally, a quote from the famous American neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander: "We are conscious in spite of our brain." That's all for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.